Have you ever trusted someone with your life, only to discover that they were secretly plotting against you the whole time? Imagine being deceived by someone you called family, someone who was supposed to care for you and protect you. But what if that person didn't have your best interests at heart? What if they were only after something far more dangerous? Your future, your inheritance, your life. That's exactly what happened to me. My stepmother, the woman I trusted most, tried to poison me. Not because of anything I had done, but because she wanted everything my father had worked for. The wealth, the property, the security, it was all part of her plan. I never saw it coming. But when I found out, it shook me to my core. The emotional shock was overwhelming, and it left me questioning everything I knew about trust, love, and family. But here's the thing. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about survival. It's about reclaiming your peace, your strength, and your life. If you've ever been betrayed by someone close to you, or if you've struggled to trust again, then this story is for you. I'm here to share my journey of uncovering dark secrets, fighting back against manipulation, and finding the courage to move forward no matter what. If you've ever faced a betrayal, if you've ever felt like you didn't know who to trust, I want you to know that you're not alone. And today I'm going to show you how I fought for my survival and what I learned in the process. So, if you're ready to hear the shocking truth, hit that follow button, like this video, and leave a comment to share your thoughts or your own experience. I'd love to hear from you. Before everything fell apart, my life seemed, well, pretty normal. I had what you could call a happy family. One of those that people look at and think, wow, they've got it all together. My dad, a man of quiet strength, always did his best to provide for us. And then there was my stepmother. When she first entered our lives, everything changed. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. She seemed like the perfect addition to our family. Charming, warm, and loving. I remember the first time I met her. She smiled at me as though she had known me for years, as if I was already her daughter. I remember feeling a bit awkward at first. She was so much more polished than me, so elegant, but she seemed so genuine, it was hard not to like her. We had those typical family moments that you see in movies. Family dinners, holidays, and vacations. Dad would always say, "This is what makes life worth living." We'd laugh, share stories, and there was always this warmth around the dinner table. And as I sat there, looking at my dad and my stepmother, I thought everything was perfect. Little did I know, there were dark secrets swirling beneath the surface. Secrets that would soon shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and family. Our house felt like a sanctuary. Sure, there were some bumps here and there. What family doesn't have those, right? But we were close-knit. There was no indication that anything could go wrong. I had the luxury of believing that our family was built on trust, on the bond that was supposed to last. My stepmother in particular always reassured me with her words, "We're family now, and family always looks out for each other." I believed her. And honestly, I wanted to believe her. She was the stepmother I never thought I needed, but in hindsight, she became the one I most needed to fear. But you know how life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One minute everything is going smoothly, and then suddenly you're blindsided. Something shifted. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened enough for me to notice. A change so subtle, so quiet, that it almost felt like it was always there, lurking. I just couldn't see it. As I sit here reflecting on those days, I can't help but think about how much I ignored, how many signs I overlooked. She was so convincing, so charming, that her manipulation seemed like nothing more than part of her personality. It was easy to dismiss the small things, the unnecessary compliments, the way she would help me by telling me what to do with my life. Looking back, it feels like she was always preparing for something bigger, something more sinister. And then things started to go downhill fast. I wish I could say I saw it coming. But I didn't. This was just the beginning, the calm before the storm. And boy, did the storm come. A storm that would tear my world apart and expose the hidden motives, jealousy, and greed that had been festering for so long. So, how did things go from perfect family moments to betrayal, manipulation, and life-threatening danger? Let me take you back to when everything started to shift. To the first signs that something was off with my stepmother. The woman I thought would be my second mother. Looking back, it's almost impossible to pinpoint exactly when things started to change, but I can tell you this much. My stepmother at first was everything I thought I needed in a parental figure. She was kind, thoughtful, and always seemed to know the right thing to say. She was the type of person who made you feel seen, heard, and loved, even when you didn't realize you needed it. From the very beginning, she wore her charm like a second skin. Her smile was always warm, her gestures always thoughtful. If there was an issue in the family, she had a way of making it feel small, like everything could be fixed with the right words. To me, it felt like she was the missing piece in our family puzzle. I remember when she first came into our lives. My dad had been single for a while after my mom passed away, and while I could tell he was lonely, he didn't talk much about it. So when he started dating again and eventually married my stepmother, I was skeptical like any kid would be. But when I met her, I thought, maybe this will work. She was sweet to me. So much so that it almost felt like she was trying to win me over. And win me over she did. At first, it wasn't even hard. She'd take me out for little shopping trips, always buying me something nice. Nothing too extravagant, but little things that made me feel important. She'd sit with me at dinner, asking about my day, always eager to know every detail. It felt good to have someone pay attention to me in that way. She wasn't my real mother, but in those moments, she made me feel like she truly cared about me. Over time, I saw how she could make anyone feel at ease. She was the type of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and, within minutes, have everyone laughing. I started noticing how my dad seemed happier, too. Like there was a lightness in the air whenever she was around. And at family gatherings, everyone adored her. My aunts, uncles, even our family friends. No one had a bad word to say about her. She fit in so well that I didn't even question it. For a while, it seemed like a dream come true, like everything I'd always wanted for my dad. A woman who was sweet, thoughtful, and loving, who took care of us, who made us feel special. I thought she was the answer to our family's broken puzzle. But here's where things start to get tricky. As much as she appeared to be perfect, I couldn't help but notice small things. Subtle moments that, looking back, should have set off alarms. It wasn't anything overt at first. Just little things that seemed too perfect. At times, she would praise my dad for things that felt excessive, too much, almost like she was constantly trying to make him feel special, or perhaps make him believe he was the center of her universe. And while it seemed sweet, it also felt odd. Like she was trying too hard. The praise wasn't just for his hard work, but for things that, well, didn't seem to need that much acknowledgement. It was as if she was doing it to make herself look good in front of others. As if every compliment had a hidden motive behind it. There was also the way she would talk about her past, especially about her previous relationships. It wasn't that she was trying to make herself look like a victim, but there was this constant mention of how unlucky she'd been with men. I remember the way she'd drop hints about how she had been misunderstood or taken advantage of, painting herself as this strong woman who'd been wronged by the world. Now, looking back, I realize those weren't just sob stories. They were a way for her to build sympathy, a way to make people see her as the good guy in her own narrative. And it worked. Everyone around her bought into it, including me. I bought into it too at first because it felt genuine. She had a way of making you think she was the most selfless, caring person you could ever meet. But there were also moments when I saw her manipulation, just faint traces that didn't make sense at the time. Sometimes after a family gathering, she would pull me aside and ask me what I thought of certain people, what I really thought. It was subtle, but looking back I see now it was her way of gauging who was a threat to her. She'd do it with such casualness, like it was nothing, but she was calculating, always analyzing, always trying to get the inside scoop. It wasn't about us being close or about genuine concern. It was about control. And slowly, as time passed, I began to notice how she seemed to have a way of turning my dad's attention solely onto her, pushing me out just a little bit more with every passing day. She would subtly undermine my relationships with my family. If she didn't approve of someone, she'd plant a small seed of doubt in my mind. It wasn't outright manipulation, but the way she'd make certain comments about people. Questions like, "Don't you think it's strange that they never ask how we're doing?" Or, "I don't think your aunt likes me much, do you?" It was small stuff like that, repeated over time, that made me start questioning people I'd known my whole life. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was her way of isolating me from others, of making me feel like she was the only one who truly cared about me, the only one I could trust. Looking back now, I see the pieces falling into place. It wasn't just her sweet smile and her loving words. It was the hidden motives behind every gesture. She wasn't just trying to fit into our family. She was positioning herself to take control. And I didn't realize that until it was too late. She was a master of manipulation, and the worst part was, she didn't even have to try. It was all so natural, so effortless. She was a chameleon, adapting to every situation, every family member, every conversation. But as I would soon learn, nothing is as it seems, especially when the stakes are high. Her charm wasn't a gift. It was a weapon, a tool she used to play everyone around her like pawns on a chessboard. And as for me, I was no exception. I was just another player in her game, one she was preparing to sacrifice without a second thought. But that part of the story, well, that came later. The real question wasn't how she was manipulating us all. The question was why. Why was she so intent on making sure she had control over everything, over everyone? What did she want? And that's where things start to get really interesting. It wasn't all at once, but over time, I started to notice subtle changes. It's funny how the smallest things can feel insignificant at first, but when you look back, they were the warning signs you were too blind to see. I mean, if you had asked me back then, I would have told you everything was just fine. But deep down, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was off. Something wasn't right. And I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. It was like trying to grasp at fog, knowing something was there but not being able to put my finger on it. It started with little things. Tiny, almost insignificant moments that, when pieced together, formed a bigger picture. My stepmother's behavior began to shift. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would raise immediate alarms. No, it was much subtler than that. She began to spend more time with my father, alone, away from me. And at first I didn't think much of it. They were a couple after all, and it made sense that they'd want time together. But then I realized she wasn't just trying to spend more time with him. She was isolating me. More often than not, I would find myself left out of conversations or activities that used to be shared, like family dinners or weekend outings. It wasn't so much that she made me feel unwanted, it was the way she did it, so quietly, so casually. She never outright told me I wasn't needed, but she'd offer excuses for why I couldn't join them. "Oh, sweetie, your dad and I are just going to run a quick errand." And just like that, I'd be left at home, unsure of what I'd missed or why I had been left out in the first place. This became a regular pattern, and the more it happened, the more it stung. I started to question if I was overreacting or if my instincts were just playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I remember one night my dad was at work, and my stepmother and I were supposed to have a quiet evening together. She suggested we watch a movie, just the two of us. But when I walked into the living room, she was already sitting there, eyes glued to her phone. She barely looked up, and when she did, it was as if I was intruding on her space. She seemed distracted, almost cold, like she didn't want to be bothered. I remember thinking, this isn't the woman who used to shower me with affection. What happened to that kindness, that warmth? The worst part. It wasn't just the coldness in her actions. It was the sudden shift in how she spoke to me. There was a distance in her tone, a way she would give me these backhanded compliments, almost as if she was trying to put me down without me even realizing it. I remember one time I wore a new dress, and instead of the enthusiastic, "You look great," she used to give me, she said, "Oh, that's a bold choice. You must really be trying to stand out." It wasn't a compliment. It was a jab. But it was wrapped in the guise of a compliment, making it hard for me to call her out on it. And when I'd ask about it, she would just shrug it off, smile sweetly, and say, "Oh, you're just so sensitive." That's the thing about manipulation. It's rarely obvious. It's always wrapped in a veil of kindness, disguised as concern or sometimes just passivity. She was a master at it. And the more she did it, the more I began to question myself. Was I really being too sensitive, or was there something deeper, something darker going on? And then came the controlling behavior. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of control where someone outright tells you what to do, but the kind where they subtly influence every decision you make. It started with small things, how I spent my time, what I did, who I spoke to. "Why don't you try doing something more productive with your time?" she'd ask, making me feel like I was wasting my life just by enjoying it. She didn't say it outright, but the judgment was clear. And it didn't stop there. If I made any plans that didn't involve her, there would be a guilt trip. "I thought we were spending the evening together, but I guess you have other priorities," she would say. I started feeling like I couldn't make any decisions without her approval. It was exhausting. But the worst part of all of this, the subtle shift in her emotions toward my dad. At first I chalked it up to them being a married couple. They were just closer, right? But it became apparent that it wasn't just closeness. There was a possessiveness to it, a way she made him feel like everything in his life revolved around her. She began to subtly undermine the relationships he had with other family members, pushing him to choose her over anyone else. It wasn't dramatic, nothing obvious. But it was the little things. She would tell him how tired she was, how much she needed him, as if no one else could take care of her. And then, when he'd try to spend time with others, she'd drop hints that made him feel guilty. "Don't you think it's time you focused on what really matters?" she'd ask him, eyes filled with feigned concern. I began to see that she wasn't just manipulating me. She was manipulating him too. I should have seen it then. The pieces were there. The way she controlled the narrative, how she isolated us both, how she undermined our relationships. But back then I didn't have the clarity I have now. I didn't realize I was being slowly pushed aside for something much more dangerous than I could have imagined. She was preparing for something big, something that would change everything. And what was her end game? Well, that's where things start to get even more twisted. The signs were all pointing toward something I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. But trust me, it was coming. The deeper the manipulation went, the clearer it became. She wasn't just trying to fit in. She was positioning herself for something far more sinister. But that's a story for later. It's almost impossible to describe the moment when you realize that someone you once trusted with your life is trying to kill you. Literally. First, I couldn't believe it. There were too many questions, too many things that didn't add up. It's one thing to feel betrayed by someone, to have someone lie to you. But it's another thing entirely to realize that someone you called family has been plotting to harm you in the most insidious way possible. And that's exactly what I began to suspect. It all started with a few strange things. First, it was the food. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. After all, what kind of person would poison their own stepchild, right? But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It started with a few stomach pains here and there, some nausea, headaches. Nothing too alarming at first. Just small discomforts that I brushed off as nothing more than the stress of life. But then the symptoms started to get worse. I would wake up feeling weak, dizzy, and on some days it felt like I had no energy at all. My appetite dropped. My stomach seemed to be constantly upset. I remember feeling like I couldn't focus at times, like my head was in a fog. But still, I didn't make the connection. How could I? What made me pause was the food she'd been preparing. It wasn't that she was doing anything unusual. At least, not in the obvious sense. But there was this one dish. She had started making this one special recipe for me. Something she claimed was a family tradition. I didn't think much of it at first. Seemed like a nice gesture. But it was after I ate it that things started to go south. I would feel incredibly sick afterward, like my body couldn't handle it. The first time I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. After all, I was a bit of a picky eater, so I blamed myself. But then it happened again. And again. The symptoms were too consistent to be ignored. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one. My dad started noticing changes in me too. At first, he thought I was just stressed or dealing with some sort of illness, but when he saw how often it happened, he started asking questions. I remember him sitting down with me, a concerned look on his face, asking, "Are you feeling all right? You've been looking pale lately." I remember brushing him off, telling him it was nothing, just stress from work. I didn't want to worry him. I didn't want to believe it myself, but the truth was, something wasn't right. Then came the incident that shook me to my core. One evening after dinner, I felt especially ill, like my stomach was in knots. I rushed to the bathroom, and as I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw how pale and exhausted I looked. I felt dizzy, almost as if I was going to pass out. And that's when I remembered something she'd said earlier that day. Something that felt like an innocent comment at the time, but in hindsight, made me question everything. She had told me, "Don't worry, honey, you'll feel better soon." I made sure to add a little something extra to that dish. It was meant to sound like she was taking extra care of me, but that comment, that was when it clicked. She had been preparing the food with something in it. Something I wasn't supposed to notice. My heart raced as I remembered all the times I had felt unwell after eating her cooking. What was she putting in it? What was she doing to me? And why? The worst part was I had no evidence. I couldn't just accuse her of poisoning me without something solid to back it up. I needed proof. But the idea that I was actually being poisoned by my own stepmother was too horrible to accept. It was like a sick nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. But I had to figure it out. I had to find out what was really going on, or I wouldn't survive this. The suspicion grew stronger each day, and I began to do what anyone would do in this situation: research. I started looking up the symptoms I was experiencing, and the more I read, the more I realized how terrifyingly close the dots were connecting. It was all pointing to something that was beyond my worst fears. Food poisoning, yes, but not accidental. This was deliberate. Someone was trying to kill me. I won't lie to you, it was a tough pill to swallow. The emotional turmoil of realizing that someone who was supposed to be my protector, my family, was actively trying to harm me was beyond what I could process. It felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I couldn't comprehend how someone could go to such extremes, how my stepmother, of all people, could be capable of something so dark and malicious. But it wasn't just about the poisoning. No, it wasn't just the food. It was the realization that there were hidden motives behind her every action, every gesture. The cooking, the attention, the sweet words. It was all part of a larger game. A game where I was the victim, and she was the player, calculating her every move. And the worst part, I was starting to lose the ability to trust anyone, even myself. How could I have missed this? How could I have trusted her? I knew I had to confront this, but how? How do you confront a family member when you have no concrete proof? No way of showing that they're trying to kill you. It was a dangerous game, and I was already playing catch-up. I had to outsmart her to stay one step ahead. But how do you outsmart someone who's already planned every move in advance? This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about discovering the truth behind this betrayal, uncovering the secrets that my stepmother had hidden so carefully. And that was only the beginning of the nightmare that was about to unfold. But I was ready now. Ready to uncover the dark secrets that had been brewing under my roof for so long. It's funny how a situation like this can completely change your perspective on trust, on family, and on the lengths people will go to when they're blinded by greed and power. But the real question was, why did she want me gone? What was at stake? What had I missed? And why did she feel the need to poison me, of all people? That's the part of the story that would lead to the answers, and it was coming soon, whether I was ready or not. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me or my well-being. It wasn't even about some petty family drama or a long-standing grudge. No, this was about something much bigger. Something much darker. The inheritance. That's what it was all about. At first, I didn't want to admit it to myself. How could I? The idea that my own stepmother, someone who had been so kind, so sweet, so caring, could have been doing all of this for money, for wealth, was almost too much to bear. But the more I pieced things together, the more I realized that this was the root of everything. She hadn't just been pretending to be a loving stepmother. She had been playing a game. A game where the stakes were life-changing, where the prize was the inheritance my father had amassed over the years. You see, my dad wasn't a billionaire or anything, but he'd done well for himself. He had a good job, he'd invested wisely over the years, and he had a modest savings account, a house, a small business, and some property. It wasn't the kind of fortune that would make headlines, but it was enough to attract someone with the right kind of greed. And as time passed, it became more and more apparent that my stepmother had been eyeing all of it. I never paid much attention to it before. I was just a kid, and I didn't understand the value of money beyond what I needed. But she She had seen an opportunity, and she was willing to do anything to take it. It was subtle at first. She never outright talked about the inheritance, never hinted at it in any obvious way. But the way she would mention my dad's investments, his plans for the future, the way she'd ask him questions about his will, about his life insurance, it all started to stand out once I looked back at it. It wasn't just casual conversation. No, she was trying to get a sense of what she could inherit, what would be left for her if anything happened to him. She never asked directly, but she always made it a point to be in the loop, to know what was going on in my dad's financial world. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that she had been playing this game for a while, long before I even suspected something was wrong. She had been making sure she was the center of my dad's life, making him feel like he couldn't live without her. She'd charm him, praise him, make him feel like the most important man in the world. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she started pushing me out. She never made it seem like an attack on me, never directly told me I wasn't welcome. It was all in the details. The way she subtly undermined my place in his life, the way she always made herself the priority. I was just a part of the background. And then, as I started noticing more and more, the pieces fell into place. She wasn't just trying to manipulate me or my dad. She was positioning herself to take everything he had. The inheritance wasn't just a safety net for her. It was the ultimate prize, and she was doing everything she could to make sure she got it. The poisoning, the manipulation, the way she isolated me, it all led back to one thing: greed. It hit me hard when I realized that this wasn't just about me being a victim. It was about something much bigger. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for my rightful place in my father's life, for the things that were mine. And my stepmother wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was the power, the control, the life she had always wanted for herself, a life where she would be in charge of everything. She wasn't just trying to poison me to get rid of me. She was trying to get me out of the way so she could secure what she believed was rightfully hers. The more I learned about her, the more I realized just how deep her manipulation went. She was playing a long game, and I had been too blind to see it. It wasn't just about getting rid of me. It was about securing her future, her wealth, her power. But the question I couldn't shake was, why? Why would she go to such extremes? What was driving her to do something so dangerous, so life-threatening? It wasn't just the inheritance. It had to be something more. She had everything she wanted. She had my dad's love, his attention, his support. Why risk it all for money? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the wealth, the inheritance, it wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was about power. And my stepmother wasn't just after a life of luxury. She was after the ability to control everything around her. The more I pieced together her actions, the more I realized that my dad wasn't the only one in her sights. She was playing a much bigger game. The inheritance wasn't just a financial goal for her. It was the key to everything. It was the key to the life she wanted to build for herself, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, even if it meant poisoning me, lying to my dad, and betraying the family trust. And yet, despite all of this, she wasn't the only one in the family who had something to gain. The inheritance had always been a source of tension, and as I dug deeper into my family's history, I began to uncover more and more secrets. Dark secrets that my dad had kept hidden for years. Secrets about his own past, about his business dealings, about his family's financial struggles. The inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of everything that had been left unresolved, all the power struggles, all the greed, all the manipulation. My stepmother wasn't the only one with hidden motives. Everyone in the family had a stake in this. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about survival. Not just surviving my stepmother's betrayal, but surviving the toxic family drama that had been festering under the surface for so long. The inheritance wasn't just a prize. It was the battleground where everything would be fought over. And the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. But why did she go this far? Why push me to the edge, try to poison me, manipulate me, and destroy me for the inheritance? What drove her to such extreme lengths? The answers I knew were coming. But first I had to survive. I had to survive her. And that would take everything I had left. I still remember the exact moment the weight of it all hit me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, just days after I started to feel the effects of the poisoning, when it all finally clicked. The realization that my stepmother, someone who had been so kind, so thoughtful, was actually trying to kill me, to push me out of the picture for her own selfish gain, hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't process it at first. How could someone I trusted so much, someone who was supposed to be family, do something so heinous? It felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I had loved her. I had trusted her. She was supposed to be the one to look after me, to help me when my own mother couldn't. How could she do this? Why would she do this? And as I sat there, replaying all the little moments where I should have seen the signs, I couldn't help but feel a deep, gut-wrenching anger. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ignored all the subtle cues, the manipulation, the way she slowly pushed me out of my father's life? But the hardest part wasn't just the betrayal, it was the deception. It wasn't that she was trying to harm me physically, though that alone was enough to shake me to my core. No, it was the emotional manipulation, the way she'd so carefully orchestrated her entire relationship with me and with my father. She made me feel like I was the one who was in the wrong for even questioning her. She twisted my emotions, made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, the one being paranoid. Every time I'd ask her why she was acting differently, she'd smile sweetly and say, "Oh honey, you're just stressed. You're imagining things." And every time I would start doubting myself, wondering if I really was overreacting. That was the worst part. The constant confusion. The emotional roller coaster she had me on. I couldn't trust my own feelings anymore. And I couldn't talk to anyone about it either, because when I did, she'd always turn it around on me. My dad, my family, even my friends, they all believed her. She had them wrapped around her finger too. It wasn't just me she was manipulating. She had everyone thinking she was the perfect stepmother, the loving wife. She was the picture of kindness, of generosity, of selflessness. And I was the paranoid one, the troublemaker. When I finally pieced everything together, when I realized what she was doing, it felt like my entire world had been shattered. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a complete betrayal of everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted about family. How could she do this? How could she be so heartless, so calculating? And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about control. She wanted to take everything from me. She wanted my father's love, his wealth, his attention, everything. And she was willing to sacrifice me, to poison me, just to get what she wanted. And that's what hit me hardest. The realization that she didn't care about me. She didn't care about us, about family. She cared about power, about wealth, about getting ahead. And when I saw that, it was like everything I had once believed in crumbled. I realized that the kindness she had shown me, the affection, the attention, it was all part of a larger scheme. I was never really family to her. I was a pawn in her game, a piece she needed to eliminate to win. The deception didn't stop there. As I dug deeper into the situation, I uncovered more lies, more manipulation. She had been feeding my father lies about me, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. "She's so sensitive," she would say. "She's been acting strange lately." And slowly my father started to question me too. He started to believe that I was overreacting, that I was imagining things. She had him wrapped around her finger, just like everyone else. What hurt the most was realizing that the entire time, I had been the victim of a well-planned strategy. Every move she made, every word she spoke, every action she took, it was all part of a plan to get me out of the picture. And I had been too trusting, too naive to see it. I had believed that she loved me, that she cared about me, that she wanted what was best for me. But in reality, I was just a means to an end. It wasn't just the poisoning, it was the psychological game she played. The way she turned everyone against me, the way she made me feel like I was the one with the problem, the one who was being unreasonable. She had convinced me that I was the crazy one, the one who was imagining things. And that's what made it so hard to fight back. It wasn't just about surviving the physical threat of poisoning. It was about surviving the mental and emotional manipulation, the gaslighting, the constant doubting of my own feelings. I had to make a choice. continue to live in denial, to accept her twisted version of reality, or fight back. But how could I fight someone who had everyone else believing in her innocence? How could I stand up to her when I couldn't even trust myself? It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about regaining my sense of self, my dignity, my belief in what was right. I had to take a stand, but first I had to understand the full extent of her betrayal. And that's where the story gets even darker. As I uncovered more about her plans, I began to realize that this wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a full-blown power struggle, and the inheritance was just the tip of the iceberg. But how far would she go? What was she really capable of? The answers were coming, but I had to brace myself. The worst was yet to come. As the days went by, it became clear. This wasn't just some family drama. It was a battle for my survival. I had trusted her. I had let my guard down, believing that she was there to help me, to guide me, and to be part of my family. But the reality was much darker than I could have imagined. She was trying to control me, manipulate me, and ultimately eliminate me from the picture. I had to escape her control, and fast. It wasn't just the poisoning. No, that was just the physical part of the battle. The real struggle was the emotional and mental manipulation she had me under. She was isolating me from everyone I cared about. My friends, my family. She made sure I couldn't trust any of them. She knew exactly how to play everyone around her, how to make them doubt me and question my intentions. And at the same time, she kept me close enough to make me feel like I couldn't escape. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for my sanity. I tried to confront her. I tried to talk to her, to ask her directly what was going on. But every time I did, she turned it around on me. She'd play the victim, make me feel like I was the one causing trouble. "You're being paranoid," she'd say with that sweet, innocent smile. "You're imagining things. I'm only trying to help you." And each time I started to doubt myself a little more. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a kid who couldn't handle things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being controlled, manipulated into believing something that wasn't true. So I tried to keep my distance. I started spending more time alone, away from her, trying to figure out what was really going on. But the more I pulled away, the more she tightened her grip. She would call, text, always checking in on me, always making sure I wasn't getting too comfortable in my own life. If I made any plans that didn't involve her, she would subtly guilt-trip me into changing them. "I thought we were spending the day together," she would say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You don't have time for me anymore." And just like that, I'd feel guilty for wanting to live my life outside of her control. But it wasn't just about guilt trips. It was about control, complete and total control. She would try to dictate what I wore, who I spent time with, what I did in my free time. If I did anything she didn't approve of, she'd make sure to let me know. It wasn't overt, not at first, but it was constant. It was like walking on eggshells, never knowing when she was going to make me feel guilty or ashamed for just being myself. She wanted to mold me into what she thought I should be, what suited her needs, not my own. The worst part was that I was so caught up in her web of manipulation that I didn't even realize how far gone I was. I was living in a constant state of confusion and fear. I would question my own decisions, second-guess myself every step of the way. What did she want from me? Why was she doing this? Was she really trying to help me, or was she just trying to eliminate me as a threat? Was I just paranoid, or was she genuinely trying to destroy my life? It became harder and harder to see the truth. I started to notice that she was playing everyone, not just me. My dad, my family, even my friends. They were all caught up in her web of lies and deceit. She had everyone believing that she was the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother, the perfect woman. And I was the one causing trouble. The one who didn't appreciate her. The one who was too difficult to deal with. She made me feel like I was the bad guy for just wanting to protect myself, for wanting to get away from her control. But the more I tried to break free, the more she tried to pull me back in. It was a game, a sick, twisted game that I was losing. Every move I made, she countered with something even more devious. I couldn't win. I couldn't escape her. Or at least that's what I thought. And yet, deep down, I knew I had to keep trying. I couldn't give up. If I didn't escape, if I didn't get out of her control, I would lose everything. I would lose myself. I would lose my family. I would lose my life. I had to find a way out, and I had to do it on my own. I had to stop letting her control my every move. But how? How could I break free from someone who had already gotten so deeply into my head? Someone who had manipulated everyone around me into believing her lies. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be simple. But I had to find a way. I had to trust myself again. I had to fight back not just for my life but for my freedom. And that meant taking action. It meant making difficult decisions, standing up to her, and facing the reality that my stepmother wasn't who I thought she was. I was no longer just trying to survive her poisoning. I was trying to survive her control, her manipulation, and her deceit. It wasn't just about getting out of her grasp. It was about reclaiming my life, my trust, and my place in this world. And that battle, that's where the story really starts to unfold. It's where I take control of my fate. But to do that, I had to get stronger. I had to outsmart her. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do that yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. As much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't keep running in circles forever. The fear, the confusion, the constant manipulation. It was exhausting. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to face the truth. I needed to know for sure what my stepmother was doing. I needed to gather evidence, something solid that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was poisoning me and manipulating my family. But how do you confront someone like that? Someone who's so calculating, so smooth in their lies, so meticulous in their actions. How do you stand up to a person who's been playing this game for so long and make them face the consequences? At first, I felt paralyzed. How could I gather evidence when everything she did was wrapped in a thick veil of deception? Every time I tried to dig deeper, she'd catch on, making me feel like I was the one who was wrong for even suspecting her. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Impossible. But I had to keep going. I had to find the truth. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about exposing her for what she really was. I couldn't live with the idea that she was getting away with everything, that my dad and everyone else would continue to believe she was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect person. I started paying closer attention to everything she did. Every little thing she said. Every action, every gesture. I made mental notes of it all, no matter how small it seemed at the time. I began to take control in a way I hadn't before. I had to outsmart her. I had to anticipate her moves, see the patterns in her behavior. She was clever, but I was smarter. Had to be. One evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done before. I started recording our conversations. Just a few simple, casual chats. Nothing suspicious, at least not to her. She was so comfortable in her manipulation that she never once thought to question why I was suddenly so attentive, so interested in her words. I kept notes on the way she would talk about my dad's health, his money, the things she'd mention about the future. She had this strange way of bringing up his finances in the most random conversations, like she was trying to make sure I was aware of what he had, what he didn't have. She made sure to plant seeds in my mind, just like she did with everyone else. And then it happened. One night, as she was preparing dinner, I caught her red-handed. I wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for, but something in my gut told me that this was the moment I needed to act. I had been watching her every move, trying to figure out what she was putting in the food. I saw her add a substance to the soup, something I hadn't seen her use before. It wasn't like the ingredients she normally used. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it didn't belong there. My heart skipped a beat as I watched her, the realization hitting me like a freight train. This is it. This is the proof I need. Without her knowing, I managed to grab a small sample of the substance and stashed it away. I didn't know what it was, but I needed to test it. I had to know for sure. I had to confirm that she was poisoning me. The next morning I took the sample to a lab. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I couldn't wait any longer. When the results came back, it was everything I feared. The substance was a potent poison, a chemical that could cause long-term damage to organs and, in the right doses, could be lethal. She had been poisoning me all along. The shock of that moment didn't hit me right away. I just stared at the test results, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. All the pieces fell into place. The sickness, the nausea, the dizziness. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just bad luck. It was deliberate. She had been poisoning me step by step, all in the name of getting what she wanted. The inheritance, the wealth, the control over everything my father had worked for. I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't let her get away with this. But how do you confront someone who's so clever, so well prepared? She had planned this after all. She had planned it so perfectly, so carefully. I knew I had to approach this cautiously. If I confronted her too early, she could cover her tracks, erase the evidence. I had to bide my time, make sure I had everything in place. I needed my dad to understand what was really going on, to see her for who she truly was. So I waited. I watched her. Every move she made, I observed, gathering more evidence, preparing for the moment when I would finally confront her and expose the truth. It was going to be a risky move, but it was the only way to make sure she didn't win. I had to be smart about it. I had to be patient. The day I decided to confront her, I was a bundle of nerves. I had everything ready. Proof, evidence, everything I needed to expose her. I knew it would be risky. I knew it could blow up in my face. But I couldn't let her continue getting away with it. I couldn't let her poison me, manipulate me, and destroy everything my father had built for us. I had to take a stand. I had to fight for my life, my family, and my future. And when that moment finally came, when I stood face to face with her, armed with the truth and ready to expose her for what she truly was, I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would she confess? Would she deny it all? Or would she try to turn the tables on me, like she had done so many times before? Whatever happened, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. And it was time for the truth to come out. The confrontation was intense. Far more intense than I had ever imagined. But the truth was out. She couldn't hide anymore. Couldn't cover up the web of lies and manipulation she had spent years weaving. Exposing her felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. But what came next? The fallout. That was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. You see, it wasn't just the betrayal I had to deal with. It wasn't just the fact that my own stepmother had been poisoning me, trying to ruin my life for an inheritance that wasn't even rightfully hers. It was everything that followed. The betrayal didn't just hurt. It reverberated throughout my entire family. My dad, the one person I thought would always have my back, was caught in the middle. He couldn't understand how she, the woman he had trusted, could be capable of such an awful betrayal. He struggled with it. And I couldn't blame him. He had been under her spell for so long. But it was the emotional turmoil of that moment, the confusion, the pain, that left a scar on me, on him, and on everyone involved. At first, it seemed like we could never get back to normal. The trust had been broken in such a profound way that it felt impossible to repair. My dad and I tried to talk, tried to rebuild, but the tension was thick. Every conversation we had seemed clouded with doubt. Every word he said, I wondered if he was really on my side or if he was still being manipulated. Every time I saw him interact with her, I could feel the distance growing between us. He didn't know what to believe anymore. He didn't know if he could trust me or her. And I couldn't blame him. After all, she had been so convincing, so adept at pulling everyone's strings, that he couldn't even see the lies anymore. I understood that, but it didn't make it any easier. The whole situation felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But what hurt the most was the way it changed me. I wasn't just hurt. I was scarred. Betrayal does that to a person. Changes the way you see the world, the way you trust people. How do you trust again after someone who was supposed to love you, care for you, turns out to be someone capable of such cruelty? How do you rebuild trust in your own family when it's been shattered so completely? I spent so many sleepless nights questioning everything I had ever believed about relationships, about love, about loyalty. Was it all just a lie? Was everyone capable of such deception? Or was it just her, just this one terrible experience? Rebuilding my life after that betrayal took time. And it wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt lost, like I didn't know who I was anymore, like I didn't know where I fit in the world. The emotional scars left by her actions ran deep. The trust one had once freely given to those I loved was gone. In its place was a constant skepticism, a fear of being hurt again. I started doubting myself, wondering if I had missed something else, if there were more lies I hadn't uncovered yet. It was exhausting, emotionally draining. But over time I began to heal. Slowly, I started realizing that just because one person had betrayed me, just because she had manipulated me and my family, didn't mean the world was full of nothing but deception. It was a painful lesson, but I began to understand that trust isn't given freely. It's earned. It's something that has to be built, brick by brick, through actions, not words. And for the first time in a long while, I started to believe that I could trust people again. I started letting others in. Friends, family, people who had shown me loyalty, who had proven that they cared for me without any hidden agenda. I also began to understand that this betrayal, while painful, didn't define me. It didn't dictate who I was or who I could become. It was a part of my story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. I had to learn to separate myself from the trauma, to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. I had to stop blaming myself for being manipulated, for being a victim. And that was a crucial turning point in my healing process, accepting that I had been hurt, but not allowing that hurt to control me any longer. The hardest part was seeing how the betrayal affected my dad. The damage done to our relationship was more complicated than I ever imagined. We had been through so much together before, but this time it felt different. He was in pain too, but he didn't know how to fix things. We were both broken, both trying to heal, but not always understanding how to do it. There were moments of anger, frustration, and tears, on both of our parts. And even though I wanted to yell at him for not seeing what she had done, I knew deep down he was struggling too. He had been betrayed just as much as I had, just in a different way. He had lost his trust in her, but he had also lost the trust he once had in me, in us. Took time, but we started rebuilding little by little. The road to healing was long, and there were setbacks, but we were trying. We had to confront the darkness of what had happened, and accept that things would never be the same again. But that didn't mean they couldn't be better. Slowly, we started working on rebuilding our relationship, on regaining the trust that had been lost. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to it. And that's when I realized that no matter how much betrayal hurt, no matter how deep the scars ran, there was always a way forward. The most important thing I learned from this experience was that healing isn't linear. It's messy, it's painful, and it takes time. But it is possible. I'm not the same person I was before this betrayal, but I'm stronger for having gone through it. And I learned that my worth wasn't determined by my stepmother's actions or anyone else's. It was something I had to rebuild for myself, and I had to learn to trust my own instincts again. The betrayal didn't break me. It may have changed me, but in the end it didn't define who I was. And that, I realized, was the first step in truly moving on from the betrayal. The first step in taking control of my life again. Because no matter how painful the journey was, it taught me one thing. I was in charge of my future. I was in charge of my happiness. And no one, not even the person who tried to destroy me, could take that from me. But that was only part of the journey. The rest, well, that's where things really began to get interesting. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next. It's strange how a moment of absolute chaos can lead to a profound sense of clarity, isn't it? After everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the manipulation, the near-death experience at the hands of my stepmother, there came a moment when I realized something that would change everything for me. That moment was when I realized that I didn't need her in my life anymore. I didn't need to seek her approval or waste any more energy on someone who had no regard for my well-being. I had spent so much time questioning myself, doubting my worth, and trying to fix something that was never meant to be fixed. But the truth was, I didn't owe her anything. Not anymore. Finding closure wasn't an easy process. It didn't happen overnight, and there was no magical moment when everything suddenly made sense. In fact, closure came in pieces. Small, fragile pieces that I had to pick up on my own. It wasn't about forgiving her for what she did to me. It was about forgiving myself for allowing it to happen in the first place. I had to accept that I couldn't change the past. The betrayal had already happened, and nothing I could do would undo the hurt. But what I could do was control how I moved forward. I could decide to heal, could choose peace. For the longest time, I was consumed by anger. I wanted revenge. I wanted to expose her to the world, to make her pay for what she had done. And to be honest, there were moments when I still wanted that. When I still wanted to scream from the rooftops how much she had destroyed. But the longer I held on to that anger, the more it ate away at me. It was as if I was giving her power over my life, even after she had already caused so much damage. And that's when I realized that the only way I could take back control was to let go. Let go of the anger. Let go of the need for revenge. Let go of the constant reminders of how she had betrayed me. I started focusing on myself. I started rediscovering the things that made me happy, the things that brought me peace. I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my dad, even though it was painful at times. We didn't have to go back to the way things were before, but we could create something new. Something that wasn't built on lies and manipulation, but on truth and mutual respect. And with time we did rebuild. Slowly but surely, we found our way back to each other. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. As for my stepmother, well, once I realized I didn't need her in my life anymore, I stopped focusing on her. I stopped letting her actions define me. I stopped allowing her to occupy space in my mind. And in doing that, I began to reclaim my power. I stopped being a victim of her manipulation. I stopped being afraid. I realized that she had been trying to take control of my life, but I was the one who had the power all along. The power to choose how I reacted to everything she had done. The power to decide that I wouldn't let her actions dictate my happiness. It was in that moment, when I fully accepted that I was in control of my own future, that I found true peace. I knew that I would never forget what happened, but I didn't have to let it consume me. I had the power to heal. I had the power to move on. And that knowledge was what gave me the strength to finally close that chapter of my life. Letting go of someone who had once been so central to my life wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about making peace with it. It was about acknowledging the pain, but choosing not to let it define my future. It was about looking forward, not backward. I wasn't going to let her take any more from me. And in that moment, I realized that the best revenge wasn't getting back at her. It was living a life that she could never take away from me. As time passed, I realized that true peace doesn't come from external circumstances. It doesn't come from revenge or validation from others. Comes from within. Comes from choosing to forgive yourself, choosing to let go of the things that hold you back, and choosing to move forward in a way that brings you peace. And that's exactly what I did. Found my peace. Found my strength. And I found the courage to rebuild my life without her. And you know what? That was the most liberating feeling I've ever had. I didn't need her to validate me. I didn't need her to be part of my life anymore. I had everything I needed within myself. I had the power to choose how I wanted to live. I had the power to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. And that was the greatest gift I could give myself. I realized, too, that closure isn't always about having the last word or getting revenge. It's about finding a way to heal from the wounds, to move past the betrayal, and to reclaim your life. It's about understanding that the people who betray you don't get to control your future. They don't get to decide your happiness. Only you do. So yes, closure came. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't easy, and it didn't happen all at once. But eventually I found my peace. And that peace, it was the most powerful thing I could have ever hoped for. It was mine to keep, and no one could ever take it from me again. And now, looking back, I see that I am stronger for having gone through it. I am wiser. I am more resilient. And most importantly, I know that I can survive anything because I now have the power to move on, to heal, and to find peace no matter what. I know I've shared a lot with you about my journey. The betrayal, the manipulation, the fight for survival, and the hard-won peace. But as I wrap up this story, there's something really important I want to leave you with. Trust and family are powerful. They are the backbone of everything we believe in and the foundation of every relationship we build. But sometimes even the ones you trust most can betray you. It's not an easy thing to accept, but it's a truth many of us have to face at some point in our lives. What I want you to take away from this is not just a story of betrayal, but a reminder of how crucial it is to protect yourself. Don't let someone else's manipulation, their toxic behavior, take away your power. Learn to trust yourself first. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Listen to your gut. Trust your instincts. Trust that you know what's right for you, even when others try to convince you otherwise. And when it comes to family, yes, family is important, but it's also okay to walk away from toxic relationships. You are not obligated to keep people in your life who don't respect you, who try to control you, or who hurt you. Sometimes, walking away from the people who are supposed to love you is the only way to protect yourself. And I know that's hard. It feels impossible at first, but it's a step toward healing, toward reclaiming your life and your peace. So, if you've been in a situation where someone has betrayed you, where you've been manipulated or taken advantage of, I want you to know this. You're not alone. There are so many of us who've gone through similar experiences, and it's okay to feel lost, confused, or angry. But don't let that define you. Don't let someone else's actions control your happiness. You are stronger than you realize. You have the power to overcome this. You have the power to heal. I encourage you to take a step back, look at the relationships in your life, and ask yourself, are they lifting me up or bringing me down? If someone is toxic, if someone is draining your energy or making you question your worth, it might be time to let them go. It's okay to protect your peace, even if it means walking away from family, from a relationship, or from someone you love. You deserve to be surrounded by people who support you, who respect you, and who genuinely care about your well-being. If you're dealing with betrayal, trust that you will come out stronger on the other side. And if you're in a toxic relationship, know that it's okay to step away. You don't have to stay in a situation that hurts you. Your life, your happiness, your peace, these things are worth protecting. And if you're going through something similar, I want you to know that it's okay to stand up for yourself. It's okay to take back control. So what do you think? Have you experienced something similar? Have you ever had to deal with trust issues or betrayal within your own family? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. And if you found this story helpful, if it's resonated with you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more content like this. Your journey matters. Your peace matters. Don't let anyone take that from you. You have the power to take control of your life and to move forward no matter what. Let's keep the conversation going because we all deserve a life of trust, love, and peace.